Some royals are born for the throne. Others choose a completely different path. Princess Irene of Greece spent 83 years in the shadow of her sister, Queen Sophia of Spain. She never married, never had children, never sought power. But her story reveals something far more compelling than the quiet figure trailing behind European royalty at state events. From concert stages to Hindu temples, from military coups to humanitarian missions, this is the life of a princess who defied every expectation. Born in exile. May 11th, 1942. Cape Town, South Africa. While World War II raged across Europe, a baby girl was born thousands of miles from her homeland. Princess Irene entered the world in exile, the youngest child of Crown Prince Paul of Greece and Princess Frederica of Hanover. Her older siblings, Princess Sophia and Prince Constantine, had already experienced the upheaval of royal displacement when Nazi forces invaded Greece in 1941. The family's exile wasn't comfortable obscurity. They lived in a rented home in Claremont, moving between South Africa and Egypt as the war continued. Young Irene's christening took place 3 weeks after her birth, with 10 godparents, including General Jan Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa, and Queen Mary of the United Kingdom. The gathering spoke to the interconnected web of European royalty, even in displacement. In 1944, when Irene was just 2 years old, the family relocated to Egypt. 2 years later, they finally returned to Greece after a referendum approved the continuity of the monarchy. Irene was 4 when she first saw her homeland, a country she would later be forced to leave again. The early displacement marked her. Unlike children raised in stable palaces with centuries of tradition around them, Irene's first memories were of movement, adaptation, and the understanding that royal status offered no protection against history's upheavals. But the family's fortunes were about to change dramatically. The princess comes home. In 1947, everything shifted. King George II of Greece died, and Irene's father ascended to the throne as King Paul. Suddenly, the exiled family became Greece's ruling monarchy. 5-year-old Irene transformed overnight from a displaced child into a princess of a restored kingdom. Life at the royal palace brought structure and tradition. Irene attended the Arsakion school at Sikiko Palace in Greece, then later Schule Schloss Salem in Baden-Württemberg, Germany, the same institution her sister Sophia had attended. The German boarding school emphasized character development and outdoor activities, a stark contrast to the sheltered existence of many European princesses. Music filled their home. The Greek royal family kept gramophones playing in every room, and Handel's Messiah drifted through open windows so often that both Irene and Sophia memorized it completely. Their father, King Paul, possessed remarkable musical talent and could have pursued a career as a concert pianist had his royal birth not determined a different path. This musical environment shaped Irene profoundly. While Sophia excelled in athletics, even becoming a reserve member of the Greek sailing team for the 1960 Rome Olympics, Irene gravitated toward the piano. But she wouldn't pick up the instrument seriously until 1962, when she was 20 years old. What came first was a different kind of education. Together with her sister Sophia and archaeologist Theophano Arvanitopoulou, Irene conducted archaeological surveys at Dekelia, collecting pottery fragments from various periods. In 1960, the 3 women co-published Archaeological Digest, a scholarly work that demonstrated both sisters' serious intellectual capabilities. This wasn't amateur dabbling. It was legitimate archaeological research conducted by trained minds. But the calm of intellectual pursuits existed against an increasingly unstable political backdrop, and Irene's privileged world was about to fracture again. the piano, and the prodigy. In 1962, at age 20, Princess Irene made a decision that would define the next phase of her life. She took up the piano, studying under Gina Bacała, the legendary Greek-born concert pianist who had studied with Sergei Rachmaninoff himself. The commitment was total. Irene gave up karate, which had been a childhood passion, to protect her hands. Bacała, known as the Queen of Pianists, didn't accept students lightly. She saw something in Irene beyond royal novelty, a genuine dedication that manifested in 7-hour daily practice sessions. The princess approached music with an intensity that surprised even her demanding teacher. Her father, King Paul, had actually played piano duets with Bacała before the war. When Irene began studying with the celebrated pianist, it created a full-circle connection. Bacała even gave lessons to King Paul, maintaining the family's deep engagement with classical music. Then, in March 1964, tragedy struck. King Paul died after an illness, and 23-year-old Constantine ascended to the throne as King Constantine II. This sudden shift placed Irene in an unexpected position. From March 6, 1964, until July 10, 1965, she was crown princess and heir presumptive to the Greek throne. If anything had happened to her bachelor brother during that 15-month period, Irene would have become Queen of Greece. But on July 10, 1965, her niece, Princess Alexia, was born, and Irene stepped back from the direct line of succession. The role had never suited her anyway. She had other ambitions, ones that had nothing to do with crowns. In 1965, Bacała oversaw Irene's debut recital in Athens. Critics noted her admirable technique, lively sense of rhythm, and perhaps most importantly, her ability to convey intensity of feeling. This wasn't a princess playing at being a musician. This was a musician who happened to be a princess. In 1967, Irene and Bacała embarked on a tour of the United States, performing in Salt Lake City, Seattle, Cincinnati, and Dallas. American journalists were fascinated by the concept of a European royal doing something productive with her life. Irene told them simply that she had always wanted to be a musician, that she would always play music. The tour demonstrated that she could hold her own professionally. Bacała, despite being a close friend of the family, made clear that she would not hesitate to tell anyone if she felt Irene was anything less than professional. The validation came from one of the world's finest pianists, and it meant everything. But back home, Greece was collapsing into political chaos that would soon scatter the royal family once more. Coup and Exile. April 21st, 1967. Military tanks rolled through Athens in the pre-dawn darkness. A group of colonels seized control of Greece, establishing a military dictatorship that would last 7 years. King Constantine II initially remained as head of state, but the situation was impossible. The military junta wielded the real power, using the king as a figurehead while systematically dismantling democratic institutions. The regime arrested thousands of political opponents, established censorship, and ruled through fear. Constantine found himself in an impossible position, maintaining the appearance of authority while having none. His every move was watched, his every decision second-guessed by the colonels who truly controlled the country. On December 13, 1967, Constantine attempted a counter-coup against the military regime. He and loyalist officers tried to mobilize military units that remained faithful to the crown. The plan was bold, but poorly executed. Within hours, it became clear that the attempt had failed catastrophically. The king, his family, and those loyal to him fled into exile. Irene, at 25 years old, left Greece for the second time in her life. this time as an adult who understood exactly what was being lost. The family scattered across Europe. Constantine and his wife, Queen Anne-Marie, eventually settled in London, where they would spend decades as a government in exile, hosting other Greek royalists and maintaining connections to a homeland that no longer wanted them. Sofia was already in Spain, having married Juan Carlos in 1962, navigating the complexities of Franco's regime while waiting for the promised restoration of the Spanish monarchy. And Irene's mother, Queen Frederica, the formidable matriarch of the family who had guided them through exile during World War II, made an unexpected choice that shocked European royal circles. Frederica went to India, and Irene went with her. The decision seemed incomprehensible to those who knew the family. Greece was in crisis. Constantine was organizing resistance from exile, trying to maintain international support for the restoration of the monarchy. The family needed unity, needed to present a strong front against the military dictatorship. Instead, the Dowager Queen disappeared to pursue Hindu philosophy in a country thousands of miles from European power centers. But Frederica had long been drawn to Eastern spirituality. The formal structures of Orthodox Christianity, while deeply important to her, couldn't answer certain questions that troubled her. She sought something beyond doctrine, beyond ritual. India, with its ancient spiritual traditions and emphasis on inner transformation, offered answers that Greek orthodoxy couldn't provide. Irene didn't hesitate to join her mother. The relationship between them was profound, built on years of exile, shared intellectual curiosity, and a recognition that they both existed slightly outside the conventional expectations of royal life. Frederica encouraged Irene's unconventional interests, her musical ambitions, her refusal to conform. Going to India together was a natural extension of their bond. In Madras, now Chennai, they found Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan, one of India's most respected philosophers and scholars. Mahadevan was director of the Centre for Advanced Study in Philosophy at Madras University, a man whose work bridged Eastern and Western philosophical traditions. He studied comparative religion with rigorous academic discipline, drawing parallels between Vedanta philosophy and European philosophical traditions. Irene enrolled in formal studies under Mahadevan's guidance. This wasn't tourism or spiritual dabbling. She attended lectures, participated in seminars, read extensively in Sanskrit philosophy. She studied the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the works of Shankara. She learned to see connections between the mystical traditions of Orthodox Christianity, the fathers of the church she had grown up reading, and the philosophical frameworks of Hindu thought. Mahadevan recognized in Irene a serious student, someone whose royal status was irrelevant to the intellectual work at hand. He pushed her to think rigorously, to question assumptions, to engage deeply with texts. Their relationship evolved from teacher and student to genuine friendship built on mutual respect. As Mahadevan aged and his health declined, he began dictating his memoirs to Irene. The project took months, with Irene carefully recording his words, asking clarifying questions, helping him articulate a lifetime of philosophical inquiry. The trust implicit in this arrangement spoke volumes. Mahadevan was entrusting his intellectual legacy to a Greek princess who could have easily returned to Europe and forgotten about him. But Irene didn't forget. Years later, long after Mahadevan's death, she became vice president of the Dr. T.M.P. Mahadevan Foundation. The foundation published his works, promoted Indian educational and cultural projects, and maintained his scholarly legacy. She helped establish an international library at Madras University, ensuring that students and scholars would have access to the resources Mahadevan had valued. She also facilitated cultural exchanges between India and Europe, bringing Indian scholars to speak at European institutions and helping European students access Indian universities for philosophical studies. The work was unglamorous and largely unnoticed by the media that followed European royalty, but it mattered to Irene more than any state function she might have attended. Irene's time in India marked a profound spiritual transformation. She didn't convert to Hinduism in any formal sense, though some observers believed she had. She never abandoned Orthodox Christianity or denied her religious heritage. Instead, she found a way to hold multiple spiritual traditions simultaneously, seeing them as different paths toward the same ultimate truth. She practiced yoga daily, adopting an Eastern lifestyle that included vegetarian eating, meditation, and a disciplined approach to physical and mental health. These practices would stay with her for the rest of her life, even after she left India. When she eventually settled in Madrid, she maintained her Eastern disciplines, an unusual sight in the formal world of European royalty, where tradition and conformity were prized above individual spiritual exploration. But while Irene found enlightenment in Madras and dedicated herself to philosophical studies, her piano career was quietly ending. The demands of daily practice, the need for constant work with a teacher, the structure that Gina Bachauer had provided, all of this was impossible to maintain while living in India and pursuing philosophical studies. Yet one more performance awaited, one that would be her most memorable. The Royal Festival Hall, June 1969, London's Royal Festival Hall. The audience filled with European royalty, packed into the ceremonial box, while Greek shipping magnates' bejeweled wives filled the stalls. Princess Irene of Greece and her teacher Gina Bachauer were about to perform Bach's concerto for two pianos with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra under conductor Max Rudolph. The evening was unusual by any measure. A Greek princess performing professionally while members of various European royal families watched from the audience. Then Prince Charles and Princess Anne were in attendance. The event attracted intense media scrutiny, not for scandal, but for the sheer novelty of a royal doing something genuinely artistic at a professional level. The critics were impressed. The Evening Standard noted that Irene had admirable technique, lively rhythm, judgment, and could convey intensity of feeling. When she took her bow, she received no fewer than a dozen bouquets of flowers. In 1971, Irene returned to the United States with Bachauer for another tour, this time to help the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, which was experiencing severe financial difficulties. The novelty of a princess at the keyboard, combined with Bachauer's popularity, brought in a huge audience and raised $100,000 for the struggling orchestra. They performed Mozart's Piano Concerto for two pianos in E-flat. The same year, they performed at Windsor Castle with Yehudi Menuhin conducting, with Princess Alexandra and Lord Mountbatten in the audience. Irene and her mother, Queen Frederica, were much in evidence at that Windsor festival. At one post-concert party, a bachelor Eton master was somewhat taken aback to discover that the attractive young woman he'd been chatting up was a Greek princess. Then, in August 1976, Gina Bachauer died suddenly in Athens at age 63. She collapsed during the Athens festival, and despite efforts to save her, passed away. For Irene, the loss was devastating. Bachauer wasn't just her teacher, she was her mentor, her validator, her connection to a professional musical world that accepted her on merit rather than title. After Bachauer's death, Irene's musical career floundered. She spoke of pursuing studies with Nadia Boulanger in Paris or at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia, but neither materialized. The driving force was gone. Without Bachauer's structure and guidance, Irene drifted away from professional performance. Music would remain important to her. She later established the Gina Bakauer Awards in 2004, sponsored by her organization World in Harmony in collaboration with the Athens Concert Hall. The awards reflected both her love for music and her belief that many talented musicians are never recognized due to lack of support. But her own performing days were over, and by 1981, Irene's life was about to change direction entirely. The move to Madrid, February 1981. Queen Frederica died at age 63 in Madrid, where she had been living with her daughter Sofia, now Queen of Spain. The loss hit Irene hard. Her mother had been her closest companion through exile, through India, through the spiritual searching that defined their relationship. Irene went to Madrid for the funeral. She intended to stay 5 days. She stayed 5 years, then 10, then permanently. Later, Irene explained to Spanish journalist Pilar Urbano that she came to Madrid for 5 days and stayed 5 years. And as time went by, she understood that her place was by Sofia's side. The decision made sense on multiple levels. Greece was still under the aftershocks of the dictatorship, which had finally ended in 1974 when it collapsed following the Turkish invasion of Cyprus. A 1974 referendum abolished the monarchy entirely. Constantine would never reign again. There was no role for Irene in Greece beyond being a former princess of a defunct institution. In Spain, however, her sister ruled as queen consort. Juan Carlos had become King of Spain in 1975 after Franco's death, and Sofia was his queen. The Spanish monarchy was stable, respected, and Sofia needed her sister. Irene moved into a simple apartment at the Palace of Zarzuela in Madrid, the residence of the Spanish royal family. The apartment was modest by royal standards, a single room with basic furnishings. Irene, despite being the daughter, sister, and aunt of kings, had no interest in luxury. In later years, she stopped wearing jewelry entirely, a striking choice for someone with access to royal collections. Her role in Spain was undefined by any official protocol. She wasn't Spanish royalty. She had no title within the Spanish system. She was simply the Queen's sister, a position that carried family importance but no state function. Irene once said that she had no status, that she was the Queen's sister and nothing more, and she was not an official. Sofia and the King were the official representatives, not her. But unofficially, Irene became something more important. She became a surrogate mother to Sofia's 3 children, Infanta Elena, Infanta Cristina, and Felipe, the current King of Spain. The children called her Aunt Pecu, short for peculiar. The nickname, which Irene embraced with good humor, acknowledged what everyone in the family recognized. She was the eccentric one, and she wore that eccentricity proudly. The peculiar princess. Irene's interests ranged far beyond what was considered acceptable or normal for European royalty. She was fascinated by paranormal phenomena, occultism, parapsychology, and extraterrestrial life. These weren't passing curiosities. She pursued them seriously, studying and reading extensively on topics that made more conservative family members uncomfortable. Her Hindu philosophy studies continued. She practiced yoga, followed an Eastern lifestyle, and avoided eating meat. The combination of spiritual discipline and unconventional interests made her an outlier in European royal circles, where tradition and conformity were prized above individual exploration. She never married, a conscious choice she discussed openly in later years. In a rare 2007 interview for her biography, Irene of Greece, the Rebel Princess, she declared that she didn't regret not having children, that she was a revolutionary. The statement was remarkable for its directness. Royal women were expected to marry and produce heirs. Irene rejected that expectation entirely. Her family teased her about being peculiar, but it came from affection rather than criticism. Sophia, despite being queen and living in the formal world of state protocol, never tried to change her sister. The bond between them was deep and unshakable. This bond was tested dramatically during one terrifying night in February 1981. The night of the coup, February 23rd, 1981. Irene was at the Palace of Zarzuela with King Juan Carlos and Queen Sofia when armed civil guard Lieutenant Colonel Antonio Tejero burst into the Spanish Congress of Deputies with 200 armed officers, firing shots into the air and holding the entire Spanish government hostage. The coup attempt, known as 23F, aimed to overthrow Spain's young democracy and restore authoritarian rule. As shots rang out in the Congress building and tanks rolled through Valencia, the royal palace became a command center. Juan Carlos, who had been installed by Franco but had carefully steered Spain toward democracy, spent the night making phone calls to military commanders, reminding them of their oath of loyalty to the crown. For Irene and Sophia, trapped in the palace, the terror was compounded by memory. They had lived through this before. On April 21st, 1967, they had experienced a military coup in Greece. They knew exactly how these situations could end, how quickly royal families could be scattered, or worse. Years later, Irene recounted the fear they both experienced that night, remembering the Greek coup and wondering if they would have to flee into exile again. Sophia was queen, but that meant nothing if the military decided otherwise. They had grown up understanding that crowns offered no real protection. Juan Carlos's steady leadership throughout that night prevented the coup from succeeding. By morning, he had secured the loyalty of key military commanders, and the coup collapsed. Democracy survived. But the experience left its mark on both sisters. They had now lived through coups in 2 different countries, both times wondering if they would wake up as refugees, whirled in harmony. In 1985, the European Union introduced a program to slaughter cows to curb milk overproduction. The economics made sense to bureaucrats in Brussels. Europe was producing too much milk, driving down prices and creating surpluses that cost money to store. The solution, from a purely financial perspective, was to reduce the number of dairy cows. For Irene, the waste was unconscionable. Healthy, productive cows being killed while children in developing nations suffered from malnutrition made no sense. The disconnect between European agricultural policy and global hunger struck her as a moral failure of staggering proportions. She launched an initiative that was audacious in its scope and complexity. Instead of slaughtering the cows, why not transport them to places where they were desperately needed? India, with its sacred regard for cattle and its massive population of malnourished children, seemed like the obvious destination. The logistics were nightmarish. Transporting thousands of cows across continents required coordinating with multiple governments, agricultural agencies, shipping companies, and Indian organizations. There were veterinary requirements, import regulations, quarantine protocols. The costs were enormous. And Irene funded much of it herself, using her personal resources and relentlessly fundraising from contacts across Europe. The project succeeded. Thousands of surplus cows from Europe and the United States were shipped to India, where they provided milk for malnourished children instead of being destroyed. The cows that would have been slaughtered for economic policy instead became life-saving resources for communities that desperately needed them. The success of that project sparked something in Irene. She had found her calling, her purpose beyond being the queen's sister or the princess without a throne. She could use her connections, her resources, her royal platform for something that actually mattered. In 1986, she founded World in Harmony, establishing it as a formal humanitarian organization based in Madrid. The organization's stated mission was to find practical ways to show solidarity with those in need and compassion for animals. But the scope quickly expanded, far beyond cow transportation. World in Harmony helped establish schools in rural Africa and South Asia, working with local communities to identify needs and develop sustainable educational infrastructure. These weren't showcase projects designed for publicity. They were practical, unglamorous efforts to provide basic education in places where none existed. The organization also established medical centers, focusing on preventative care and basic health services in regions without access to modern medicine. Irene understood that expensive, high-tech solutions weren't what these communities needed. They needed clean water, basic sanitation, vaccination programs, and trained health workers. World in Harmony provided funding and organizational support to make those things happen. Educational scholarships became a major focus. The organization worked extensively in the United States, granting scholarships to members of the Hopi Native American community to complete their secondary and higher education. Irene was particularly interested in supporting indigenous communities trying to preserve their cultural identity while accessing modern education. The organization supported an art school in Arizona that taught Hopi traditions, values, and philosophies. The school wasn't about preparing students for commercial art careers. It was about preserving cultural knowledge that was in danger of disappearing, ensuring that younger generations understood and valued their heritage. In Greece, despite the complicated history between Irene and her homeland, World in Harmony worked extensively with various institutions and foundations. The organization provided food aid to impoverished regions, supplied school materials to students in areas where families couldn't afford basic supplies, and funded medicine for refugee infants and children. When natural disasters struck Greece, whether earthquakes, floods, or fires, World in Harmony was among the first organizations to provide assistance. Irene might have lived in Spain, might have renounced her Greek citizenship, but she never stopped caring about the country of her birth. The organization also supported groups working with children with special needs, funding programs that provided education, therapy, and support services. Again, these weren't high-profile projects that generated media coverage. They were practical efforts to help families and children who had been left behind by inadequate social services. Animal welfare remained central to World in Harmony's mission. Beyond the original cow transportation project, the organization worked to prevent unnecessary animal slaughter, reduce food waste in developed countries, and promote more ethical treatment of animals in agricultural systems. Irene donated her entire inheritance from her parents to World in Harmony. King Paul and Queen Frederica had left their children a substantial estate, enough to ensure financial security for life. Irene took her share and gave all of it to the organization. She kept nothing for herself. She lived modestly in her single room at Zarzuela Palace. She drew no salary from World in Harmony, despite serving as its president and doing virtually all of the organizational work. She had no personal fortune, no savings, no investments. Everything went to the cause. Her family thought she was mad. Even Sophia, who supported her sister's work, worried about Irene's complete financial self-deprivation. What would happen when she was old? What if she needed expensive medical care? How would she support herself? But Irene had no interest in these practical concerns. She had lived in palaces. She had worn royal jewels. She had experienced material luxury. None of it meant anything compared to the work. She told interviewers that she could serve the world through private means, that this was how history evolved, through individual choices to act with compassion. She served as president of World in Harmony from its founding in 1986 until 2023, a span of 37 years. The organization became her identity, her purpose, her life's work. When people asked who she was, she didn't say she was a princess or the Queen's sister. She said she was president of World in Harmony. In 2023, her declining health made it impossible to continue. The cognitive impairment that would eventually take her life was already affecting her ability to manage the complex organizational work. The board of World in Harmony, recognizing that the organization couldn't function without Irene's personal involvement and leadership, made the difficult decision to wind down operations. The organization's work ended in 2024. For Irene, watching something she had built over nearly 4 decades come to an end must have been devastating. But she had always known that World in Harmony was tied to her personal involvement. She had never built it to outlast her. She had built it to do as much good as possible while she was capable of leading it. And the good it did was substantial, touching thousands of lives across 3 continents, providing education, healthcare, food, and hope to people who had been forgotten by wealthier nations and more powerful institutions. The Spanish Princess. Decades passed in Madrid. Irene attended cultural events with Sofia, always slightly to the side, never seeking the spotlight. She accompanied her sister to concerts, art exhibitions, and museums. Their shared love of archaeology continued, and they often discussed their earlier work at Exile. In 2000, Irene donated a selection of rare books and archaeological artifacts from the family collection to the Benaki Museum in Athens, ensuring that Greek cultural treasures remained accessible to scholars and the public. In 2002, she faced a health crisis when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. True to her private nature, the diagnosis and treatment were handled with outstanding discretion. She underwent chemotherapy and eventually overcame the disease. The family rallied around her, but details were kept carefully hidden from the press. In 2007, she became godmother to Simeon Hassan of Bulgaria, with King Mohammed, the sixth of Morocco, serving as godfather. The ceremony took place at St. John of Rila Church at Zarska Bistrica, connecting her once again to the network of European royalty that had defined her birth, but never quite contained her spirit. By 2018, Irene had lived in Spain for nearly 4 decades. That year, she made her final break with Greece. On March 16, 2018, she obtained Spanish nationality through a special process known as Carta de Naturaleza, granted by the government through royal decree. The decree cited exceptional circumstances, noting that she maintained close personal ties with all members of the Spanish royal family and had a special bond with Spain. To obtain Spanish citizenship, she had to renounce her Greek nationality. After 76 years as a Greek princess, Irene became a Spanish citizen. The symbolism was clear. Spain was her home. Sofia was her family. Greece was the past. Infanta Cristina, Sofia's younger daughter, had named her daughter Irene in 2005 in honor of her aunt. The gesture meant everything to Irene, who had no children of her own, but had helped raise Sofia's 3 children. The final years. In November 2023, the Spanish royal household quietly announced that Princess Irene was suffering from cognitive impairment. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. The sharp mind that had studied philosophy in Madras, mastered complex piano concertos, and managed an international humanitarian organization was beginning to fail. Sofia adapted her schedule to accommodate Irene's condition, reducing public engagements and spending more time at Zarzuela Palace. The sisters, who had been close since childhood, became even more inseparable. Irene's last public appearance was at the wedding of her nephew and godson, Prince Nikolaos, in February 2025 in Athens. She attended in a wheelchair, a shadow of the vibrant woman who had once commanded audiences at the Royal Festival Hall. But she was there, present for family, fulfilling the obligations that mattered to her even as her health declined. By the summer of 2025, her condition worsened significantly. She withdrew entirely from the few public activities she had maintained, always accompanying Sofia to cultural events and concerts. On January 13th, 2026, the Spanish royal household announced that Irene's condition had worsened critically. Queen Sofia immediately cancelled all public engagements to be at her sister's side. For 2 days, Sofia remained with Irene, holding vigil as the end approached. On January 15th, 2026, at 11:40 in the morning, Princess Irene of Greece and Denmark died at the Palace of Zarzuela in Madrid, surrounded by loved ones. She was 83 years old. The announcement from the Spanish royal household was brief and formal. Their Majesties the King and Queen, and Her Majesty Queen Sofia, regretted to announce the passing of Her Royal Highness Princess Irene of Greece. But behind the formal language lay a deeper grief. Sofia had lost her closest companion, her confidant, her sister. The funeral. After private services at the Palace of Zarzuela, Irene's body, escorted by the royal guard, was laid in repose at the Cathedral of St. Andrew and St. Demetrius in Madrid on January 17th. Royals from across Europe began gathering for the funeral. Then her remains were transferred to Greece, to the country she had left behind, but never stopped being connected to through blood and history. On January 20th, 2026, the funeral took place at the Metropolitan Cathedral of Athens. Royals from across Europe attended. Queen Sofia arrived with her daughter Infanta Cristina, visibly emotional. King Felipe, Queen Letizia, Princess Leonor, and Infanta Sofia were there. Queen Anne-Marie, widow of Constantine II, comforted Sofia as tears fell. Crown Prince Pavlos gave a eulogy, speaking about an aunt who had chosen an unconventional path but had remained devoted to family. Prince Nikolaos spoke about a godmother who had shown him that being royal didn't mean conforming to expectations. After the service, the family travelled to the royal cemetery at Tatoi. Irene was laid to rest alongside her parents, King Paul and Queen Frederica, and her brother, Constantine II, who had died in 2023. The Greek royal family, scattered by coups and referendums, reunited in death in the soil of the homeland they had lost. Sofia held a Greek flag during the funeral procession, a gesture that spoke to everything Irene had been. Greek by birth, Spanish by choice, but never quite belonging entirely to either country. She had been her own person, carving a path that satisfied her intellect, her spirituality, and her deep compassion for others. The legacy. Princess Irene of Greece and Denmark lived 83 years without ever quite fitting the mold of what a princess should be. She never married. She never had children. She never sought power or position. Instead, she pursued music until her mentor died, then shifted to humanitarian work and spiritual seeking. She lived through 2 world wars' aftermath, 2 military coups, multiple exiles, and the complete dissolution of her family's monarchy. She watched her sister become a queen, while she remained simply the queen's sister. She could have been bitter about playing second to Sofia's starring role. Instead, she chose her own path entirely. Her interests in Hindu philosophy, paranormal phenomena, and animal welfare marked her as eccentric in royal circles that prized conformity. Her choice to remain unmarried in an era when marriage was considered a princess's primary duty was radical. Her donation of her entire inheritance to charity was unprecedented. But perhaps her most remarkable quality was her quiet contentment with a supporting role. She understood that she didn't need a throne or a title to make a difference. Her work through World in Harmony touched thousands of lives. Her presence beside Sophia provided stability and companionship through decades of public service. Her role as surrogate mother to Sophia's children enriched all their lives. She once said she had no status, that she was nothing more than the Queen's sister. But that wasn't quite true. She was a concert pianist who performed at the Royal Festival Hall. She was an archaeologist who co-published scholarly work. She was a philosopher who studied under respected teachers in India. She was a humanitarian who founded an organization that helped people across 3 continents. She was a woman who chose her own path and walked it with dignity until the very end. The shadow she supposedly lived in was of her own choosing. She could have sought the spotlight. She chose not to. That's not living in shadow. That's wisdom. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.